Welcome to the Black South podcast, South to America, where we reclaim the sacredness of the South, its stories, its people, its legacy. This podcast is inspired by Dr. Imani Perry's award-winning book, and we encourage you to pick up a copy. In Season 1, we're taking you to Durham, North Carolina, through the voices of community builders creating space for Black flourishing. Let's get into it.
We'll go ahead and get started then.
Let's do
Reverend Dr. Carl Kenney, thank you so much for joining us on the South to America podcast.
Well, it's good to be here. I respect both of you and your work and excited for your coming to this wonderful place called Durham and participating in the ongoing grappling to bear witness to life on the other side of the river. We sure got trying to get on the other side of the river. We ain't there yet.
Cross that Mississippi,
man. Trying to cross that Mississippi.
Yeah. Yes, for us, it's going back towards freedom, crossing the
yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess the perspective does matter.
Yeah. But yeah, we'd love to hear your answer to who is Reverend Dr. Carl Kenney. We'd love to hear your life journey and your story.
I think when it comes to the answer to that question, I think with all of us, it's easy to get locked into an answer that doesn't take into consideration the journey. You could easily say who I am in this moment, in this season, without pondering how you got to this point in life. I think I'm really grateful for my life journey. And I think the biggest gift to me in my journey has been my willingness to be honest and transparent around my mistakes. I think we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So there's this dialogue with me and my work in ministry that is supported and complicated by my work as a journalist and the simultaneous movement toward the good and the bad news. And when you investigate, report on the bad news or the not so good news, and sometimes the good news that's in public space, you have to hold that up in relationship with the gospel. It was Karl Barth talked about the good preaching is holding in one hand the newspaper and the other hand the Bible. So it's that the constant exchange between what takes place in public space and what takes place within the way we interpret that from faith lens. That is my ongoing story, and it's a story that is measured by confronting the contradictions of faith community. It's also the ongoing contemplation of the question of theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? And I think that for sojourners of the Black faith tradition, I think we continue to ask the question, how long, Lord? And so for me, it's been a lifelong journey. I just celebrated, God knows, I just celebrated 40 years as pastor.
Wow.
Yeah, which means two things. One is I'm old as hell. And another thing is I have witnessed over 40 years a radical shift in the way the Black church functions, while also having to contend again with some of the deep theological hypocrisies of the Black faith tradition. So I think in a nutshell, that's who I am and who I continue to become. I see myself becoming something new. One of the things I just add this before I forget it. One of the conversations I recently had at a coffee house where I have a friend who's transgendered, and an excellence process, by the way. You can't tell that he was a she at one point, who is reached out to me to get advice on the writing of a book that considers how his personal life story is impacted by theology. Right? And during the conversation, one of the things that came to mind for me is this ongoing dialogue with marginalized people about how to create space that is safe and healing and empowering beyond our particularity. You know, like Theo Whitleaf, the Dutch theologian, the way of the Black Messiah, he talks about the juxtaposition between the particular and the universal. You know, how do we uplift this idea of faith as a universal call? You know, Jesus blesses all the same, while also embracing the particular struggles of different communities. So for me, the most recent journey has been the Building the Black-Brown Coalition work. Especially here in Durham, where right now we are grieving the suicide of a 14-year-old student, middle school student, committed suicide.
I heard about that.
Yeah. And I recently I went and blessed the holy ground that is I'm not going to give the name of the church, but there was a conversation about this local church that had allowed their sanctuary to be used for the training for ICE. It turned out that it wasn't ICE, it was the police department.
Oh, wow.
And in my mind, it's the same thing when you open up your sacred, safe space for law enforcement to be trained on whatever it is they're being trained to do. It struck a level of fear to the undocumented community living in Durham. And there's a very large population of undocumented residents, and many of whom are faithful members of the congregation of that church. And so I received a call from one about the fear of going back to church, the ideal of being snatched up and taken away and taken back to wherever you came from, right? That is the climate in which we live. And the idea prior to the action we took 2 weeks ago was to do a protest in front of the church. The church's response was to send forth a cease and desist order. And Brianna was a part of that, by the way. Some other people that you know, Alexandria, former council, former member of the Board of Education, they got a cease and desist order, right? You know, and followed by what felt like a threat that if y'all show up, we're gonna put your ass in jail. Right? So it came to me, and I said, what we're gonna do is a pop-up church. We'll do a pop-up. We'll show up in front of the church, and what we're gonna do is have a service where we're gonna name this ground this sacred ground. This is sacred space that we. And then I'm sitting there and meditating upon the significance of the moment. And brother, sister, I tell you, the thing that came to mind was the Tower of Babel. And I talked about the desire to build temples that reach to the heavens, that put us above and beyond the people who are on the ground. The obsession with self that leads to believing that we have the right to get closer and closer to God and the people who just stand on sacred ground. And recognize the relationship between space, the ground we live, and our commitment to each other, right? And then I lifted up in that statement the reversal of the curse of the Tower of Babel, the day of Pentecost, where they gathered from all over the world and they spoke unknown language, different languages, and they began to speak in something that sounded very familiar. That we are called in this moment to speak a language of love and unity, like a language of courage and faith and commitment to each other. That's what we did, you know. There were about 6 or 7 people there. But it was response, and we talked about, you know, what it means to be a community committed to the heartbeat of every person we meet. So that's where we are in Durham right now. So we have that. We have this historical battle of the Black community to reclaim the excellence of the Hayti, right? We have that ongoing desire to get back to what it used to be, whatever that was, to get back to what is essentially self-sufficiency. It's a community that didn't need the blessing of the outsiders to say we're okay. Right. So when I talked about how imagine a movement of transgender You know, lesbian and gay, straight, black, white, you know, Asian, Native American. You know, imagine a gathering of people from different ways of being and thinking and cultures and expressions, and we all come together and we say, we see you. What you want to do is destroy our bond for the sake of your idea. You know, so we talked about that a little bit yesterday, well, a couple of days ago, in reference to the where we are in this moment. It's a troubling moment right now. And for everybody, someone's yelling at me over here.
That's all right.
You're good.
I had to pause in humble submission to the power of the beauty that just passed me by. So I mean, I think that's part of what where I am in this moment. And I don't know about you, but I'm just trying to figure it out. This is different.
Yeah,
this is a little different than what we're used to.
Yeah. I almost want to jump to our next question because of some of the stuff you mentioned. We had a question of what's the work you do now, which we can maybe just say that in a biography. But I want to jump more actually to the question of what do you feel like with some of the things that you named of what's happened in Durham, what's happening in Durham, what can Durham teach the rest of the country, you feel like?
Well, Durham is a special place and we often forget it. You know, Durham is a community that is rich in culture and multicultural. You know, we're rich in diversity. You know, we model what other communities should be, but we also a community that takes a lot of that for granted. I think what happens in communities where you have a rich history, you know, a legacy of empowered people is we begin to fight each other. You know, since we begin to fight against each other. I think that right in this particular season, we're having to rename a lot of what we've taken for granted. You know, we have to revisit the language that we use and the assumptions we make about what it means to get over. You know, the ideal of getting to the promised land. You know, I've been really contending a lot with how one of the failures, well, one of the concerns of my life is that I'm pretty much a person that is not committed to any institution. You know, I'm not committed to a Greek organization. I'm not committed to a faith community right now. You know, I'm not a part of the bougie community when it comes to like institutions that are used to define respectability. And I think the reason for that has been I've never wanted to be a part of something that has to give me permission to be me. And I think what we're struggling with right now, excuse me, I think what Durham can teach us, and I think what Durham is teaching, is that the assumptions we make about being an empowered community, the decisions we made around the building of a Hayti community, they can be forfeited quickly, especially when the basis for our decisions are not rooted in Black pride. They're not rooted in Black community. They're rooted in a definition of Black excellence that may limit the progress of other people. So we become a community that is more class driven than community driven, you know. So I think that there's a lot to be learned in living in Durham. A lot of what we do in Durham that we take for granted when we move outside of Durham to other places across the state. We discover very quickly it's scary over there. You know, it's scary in Newton, North Carolina, where they still have a parade that celebrates the Confederacy. Or in Henderson, North Carolina. Until very recently, I had a KKK hotline that was managed in Henderson, North Carolina, or other parts of the community, of the state, where the racism is out in your face. It's not covered. So there's a lot to be learned about Durham. But I do believe that, and your coming here is like perfect timing, because I think we're embarking on a different conversation now. The conversation has been about, if you want to get a little bit of this pie, then this is what you got to do to get it.
Wow.
And what that looked like is you go to high school, you get a good education, you go to college, you get a better education, and you act like you got some sense. You pull your pants up, and you wear your suit and your tie, and you join this organization over here to prove to the people that you're networking with the who's who. And the idea has been that if you play by those rules of respectability, you would be successful. What we're discovering right now, it's not working.
Yeah.
Because the dialogue, the game has changed in the midst of this DEI conversations or some of the other things that we're witnessing. It's not the same thing that many of us grew up with. So I think in Durham, what we're about to witness is a deep grappling of the soul around what it means to be a liberated Black community. That is invested in the community, that's really invested in the progress, the success of everyone in that community. And again, I think it's part of what we lost with Hayti.
Yeah.
That you could learn from each other, so that's the lesson. There are lessons for communities across the country that they had at Black Wall Street. The question is, what did we lose? And in addition, the conversation also has to be about what was our participation and what was lost. So that's why I preface this conversation with, I'm becoming something different. You asked a question about my work. My work is essentially, it's been, I like to think of myself as a street prophet.
I love that.
I like to think of myself as, I'm trying to figure out if I'm Jeremiah, Isaiah, or someone else. Which of the prophets?
Elisha, who called out the bears, huh?
Yeah, and I'm really enamored most with John the Baptist.
Yeah.
But in Elijah, because of the anti-establishment focus of it. I don't see myself as a temple prophet. Temple prophets, no one be that. But I see myself as a combination of the prophets of the Bible, and a social critic like a James Baldwin, who used the pen to be courageous. So, and that that works with my journalism work, and that also works with my fiction.
I definitely see you as, even before, I've never heard you say that about yourself, but that's how I thought of you. And the first time we sat down with you together and I got to listen to you talk for an extended period of time, I was like, it's like talking to James Baldwin. And just really appreciate your mind, the way you think and your perspective. I have a question for you about theology, and it's a little bit of a selfish question, but also I'm intrigued to ask you because I know you care deeply about theology and how it forms people. And that's something I want to study further in my own studies and research, is the ways that theology impacts human behavior and the shaping of that. In my seminary class this morning, there was a gentleman, a white guy, naming that in his denomination and faith tradition, they're not even at the point where they think that women should be even elders, yet alone pastor preacher. And so I was commenting on his comment about the ways that I think that what theological claim do people in his community have to have an interpretation of scripture that support that, but then also to bring in Emily M. Towns, who I know is a friend of yours, and her term of the fantastic hegemonic imagination, and the ways that white terrorism and their imagination is then coupled with sacred text to create like this solidified belief system, that then creates a community like the one my classmate is talking about. So I'd love for you to speak to just that idea of
Mm.
theology and the rootedness that it has in the molding and shaping of people. But
Right,
then also, you know, I know this is a super long question, but I know you're going to have so much to say. But then also, like, what is the theological shift that has to happen to support where you believe Durham is headed, even?
Well, I think, you know, that everything we face has a theological root to it. Okay. Everything is theologically rooted. And that's why theological education matters, is because of the ministers who the starting point of the reflection is scripture. You got to understand the basis of the scripture as a document that has, in a sense, a theology behind it too, and that our theology impacts it. So I will answer your question by saying I think the most intriguing piece of theology that we have to consider is anthropology, what it means to be human.
Yeah.
You know, and who controls that definition.
Yeah.
And so we know that when it comes to the construction of the biblical text, the anthropological power was in the hands of the white men, or the majority, the male culture of that time, right? Who wanted to identify themselves as closer to God than the women, who are also part of God's creation. So it's very easy to build a theology that says that the man has priority over a woman, and then for the white supremacists to say the white men and women have priority over black people. So there's that layering that is rooted in anthropology, that how we see God is really important. For that reason, in my work from way back in my early days of ministry, going back into the mid 80s, always refer to the Holy Spirit as a she, you know, the Nuna, you know, and the importance of giving power to God as woman, you know, versus God with a big penis. And then men taking on the role of identifying who among them have the biggest penis to get closest to God.
Right.
So there's that whole the struggle around the power dynamic around defining who among us is closest to God. And so when we deconstruct our anthropology, you know, and we get rid of the power play that uses the biblical text to minimize the voice and the role of the people that are in the text. So you see for a person who says like, we don't want to place with the women. Well, okay, so God is a man with a penis, and therefore God is going to, who creates all that we know as good, right? Who creates woman as good, not to mention that Al Shaddai, the breasted one, the God breastfeeds the children for the purpose of them being nurtured into life. Not to mention the birth pangs of God that produced the church on the day of Pentecost. Not to mention the mass of biblical language that is rooted in feminine idea, right? It's the code creed. God is both male and female. The assumption that God can be a man. That God creates humans in the image of Himself. Is ludicrous. So I go down that path to simply state that when we think about the power dynamics of the church of the day, that has implication when it comes to everything we do, right? When the anthropological question has implications when it comes to the way we think about women in leadership, when it comes to the way we think about women in the context of marriage, when it comes to the women in the context of the work of the church, when it comes to the women in political leadership, when it comes to the way we think about immigrants, the way we think about land, the land created by God, the whole idea of American exceptionalism is a theological claim. Everything that we are teaching has to have a sound theological basis. If you can't bring your theology to conversation, don't part your lip to say it. Because you've got to understand the complications in exposing an idea that is not going to be consistent. And be careful, I tell people, like, be careful with marrying Hebrew Bible text with the New Testament text, and owning the fact that when the Hebrew Bible says, go into the land and kill all the men, the women, and the children, and take it by force, that we're owning that type of interpretation of the biblical narrative is what has us in trouble right now when it comes to Palestinian and Israeli conflict. Because in the mind of the Israelis, well, God told us to go take the land. And if necessary, we have to kill them by force because God wants us to have it. And then you have the kind of conversation, okay, why would God make you the special privileged people of God? And then when it comes to the biblical interpretation, we have to own the fact that the Hebrew Bible is not a text that is for the totality of human creation. It's a text that specifically deals with the Hebrew people's relationship with God. Which is why you go out of the land that was chosen for the paradise land. And guess what? There's some other folks out there. There's some Negroes out there outside of paradise, because guess what? There was a creation that coincided with the creation of the people of God. That when we bring that kind of interpretation to the biblical text, we have a better way of understanding what this really is about. Is we are the chosen people of God. And this is our story. Ain't got nothing to do with your story. So again, we can deconstruct. I will also say when it comes to that type of hermeneutic, hermeneutic of suspicion, then you have to own your own bias in interpreting the text, right? And for me, again, the essential question has always been, what does it mean for this person to be made in the image of God? How is this person who I want to judge God created and God supported and God loved as part of God's creation? So for me, what that meant is that I had to come to the altar of God and contend with my bias around women, right? I also had to come to the altar of God and deal with my biases around LGBTQ. What does it mean for them to be created in the image of God? And one thing that I had to submit is that as much as I want to tell people how to think about God, my responsibility is to teach them how to be with God. My loving them takes precedent on me to informing them you're going to hell for whatever reason they exist. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think the theology and specifically anthropology, because what it means to be human, right? How that can get at so much of what we're conflicted with right now.
I'd love for you to, I mean, I don't know if you want to, but I feel like your comments to me the other day on anthropology are really interesting too.
Yeah, what did you say?
No, I think you named it. I think you spoke to what I was naming the other day. I don't know if I'm thinking about it wrong, but I don't know if there is, like, when approaching the text or when just thinking theologically in general, do you go to theology first or you go to anthropology first? And is that in tension with one another at times? Again, I don't know if I'm thinking about it wrong, but it might just like always play hand in hand. But yeah.
For me, I want to begin with the simple question that is anthropological, rooted in what is God's intent in creation. And creating man and creating woman. What is God's intent in that created moment? Right? Was the intent of that creative moment to charge the man with dominion over her? Or is the real lesson in that creative moment a lesson about the power of partnership, or the significance in building a world consistent with the mind of God as a unit? Is it a statement about, is that creative moment about how he has been given God creative wisdom, God give creative abilities, that, and she has been given the same, and that together they create something more powerful as part of God's creative will. So I think that when we think about everything we look at, when we think about the creation, you know, the creation story gets at that too, right? I mean, there's a way of talking about creation as a spiritual task. I tell part of my challenge with when I talk about marriage is that we don't understand it.
Yeah.
Because we make marriage about a power play, but it's actually God's statement about the ability to build something greater.
Yeah.
So it's not about the submission of the woman.
Yeah.
It's about the mutual submission of both.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that whole thing about the mutual submission. So that's the question about, okay, what's the purpose of creation, right?
Yeah.
And then when we think about that within the context of a lot of what I've been dealing with is like African religion and spirituality, and we think about which we miss oftentimes when it comes to the way we think about the world, you know, nature. What is the role of the Haman, and then when it comes to the world that we're given to protect and to love and to celebrate as God's gift. You know? So I think that the question that you ponder is a really powerful question, but it begins for me again with okay, what is creation here? What is the purpose of creation? You know, and that can show up in a lot of theological, complicated theological conversations too. So when you talk about like right now, this whole thing with transgender, you know, we can shift it, right? We can shift it a little bit by moving past what's our role in creation and being in partnership with a person who's conflicted about their gender identity. Okay, because see that conversation is not about me.
Yeah.
You see that they're struggling with their gender identity. It's not a statement about my faith.
Yeah.
It is a conversation about my response to their faith struggle.
Yeah.
Right. And that my responsibility again as part of the creation is to ask, well, okay, God, my prayer is, God, what do I do in loving and being present with this person who's battling something that I don't fully understand. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that creation in anthropology, you know, where's my relationship going to be with this person?
That's good.
Yeah. That was all my questions. Do you have any more?
Well, I know before that we've talked too, and this is keeping on the realm of theology and formation. We talk about how much violence can show up when people hold on to theologies that allow or permit violence or influence it. And I don't know, you had asked a good question too before and saying like, what are the theologies that need a shift in Durham?
Yeah.
So I wonder, what are the theologies that need a shift to make Durham less violent? Yeah.
Well, I think we have misinterpreted theology to be about power. You know, it's coercion. You know, that theology used as a weapon,
Right.
To force an agenda that we claim belongs to God. Okay, that when theology becomes that, then we lose the power of the gospel. The message of the gospel is a celebration of freedom. It's a liberation, right? It frees people from the violence of messages that force divides. You know, when you look at the messaging in New Testament, right, the gospel message the gospel and even in the letters of the New Testament, what we discover is a whole lot that deals with the issue of division, coercion. The original conflict of the early church being the question of circumcision. Okay, so this is historical interpretation that this symbol of God's presence found in the circumcision. And again, one of the reasons why the male are dominant in the way we think about power, because the man has to be circumcised for the sake of proving that God is in this community, right? And that circumcision validates his spouse and his children and everything that's a part of that life. But what happens in the New Testament through the writing specifically of Paul is to minimize the credibility of that interpretation, the circumcision of the heart. And so much of what we have to overcome when it comes to theological ideology is the idea that my role as religious leader is to convince you of the only way to think about power. That there is a transition that takes place in the heart of the believer. And that is that the coercion for power is replaced by the power of love. And the only way you can purely love is if you can identify with the heart of the person. So Jesus models the witness of Christ as a modeling of seeing the heart of the broken, and interpreting the human condition. So it's not just a conversation about the moral idea. Jesus is able to think about the moral idea within the context of the human grappling of the soul. So what it means to contend with not being able to feed your family, while you're being told that the moral ideal is that you take your back behind to church on Sunday and you pray to the Lord to feed you, and you're going to get a sandwich at the end of the day. So there's that struggle between the frailty of the human person, and the ideal of what faith can produce. What Jesus does is get to the heart of the person, and what Jesus calls us to do is to do the same. And what one does, and the coercion does, is create the good versus the bad, the sheep versus the goat, and then the definition of those who are and those who aren't. And we usually base that on some ideal of prosperity. So these people over here, they are the good Christians because, look, he got a good job and he got a good house and he got a spouse who's submissive to him and he's got children to do the right thing. That's a good Christian. But this guy over here, who just robbed the liquor store. This person over here who loved the liquor store because he got to feed his family. He's disruptive. He's immoral. But we're not taking a look at the heart. That loved the family enough to put himself at risk. Right?
Yes.
And so that the way we think about the ethics, the way we think about theology and its relationship to the ethics, and like I said, a lot of what I'm continuing with right now is some of the deep contradictions that come and not placing theology above the assumptions we make about our faith. And is there a place where we can righteously come and submit? I remember. I won't tell the church, but years ago, I went to a church that was in Missouri for a men's conference, and we got down and dirty when I said we're going to talk today about sex. Okay, again anthropology. Right. Anthropology. We know how congregations have been taught to think about sex, but we haven't given space for a real discussion about how that sex thing impacts the way people think about faith. It's one of the things that keep a lot of men from being members of the church. And we got into this deep conversation around how they felt about it. And the conversation was not one of judgment. It wasn't intended to tell them how to think about it.
Yeah.
It was intended to give them a space to talk about how they felt about some of the contradictions in their heart. Okay. In other words, there was assumption of the way they're supposed to be that was conflicted by the struggles that they were carrying around the way they conduct themselves as sexual beings. That's real. That's real talk, right?
Yeah.
That's real. That's real talk.
Right.
That's an anthropological conversation.
Yeah.
And what we created is a silencing around the conversation because of the guilt the men carry. What would happen in the conversation, we had a number of, and I said that we're going to have confession. We're going to talk about what you're dealing with and how you feel about it and how you think God sees you in this moment. We had people who were leaders of the church, deacons, who confessed extramarital affair, who confessed all kinds of thoughts in their minds. And there were tears in that moment as the men were able to say. So again, anthropological conversation. What do we do? What do we do with the moral discussion over here?
Yeah.
And that, that whole Augustine struggle, right? Augustine wanted us to beat yourself into submission of the Lord. Beat yourself into submission.
Yeah.
Beat yourselves. There's no conversation about accountability. And what would it mean to have a real conversation about accountability with men outside the work of the church? Now, for me, what that means, I'll just give my own personal struggles as a single brother, and when it comes to the way I practice my faith, when it comes to dating, right? And I go to John Kenney's definition of fornication, the objectification and manipulation of another for a purpose of self-gratification.
Yeah.
That as a man who is called to be in partnership with women and uplifting the creation of God that will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that I have to consistently ponder the consequences of manipulating a woman for my pleasure when the truth of the matter is I only want to play. And when you think about your place in the world that God has created, and you think about how you have to be responsible for protecting her heart. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then that leads to a different way of engaging in this world that God has created. So I just wonder what it would mean for there to be a different kind of conversation. It's not about you can't have sex before you get married and all that. It's
Right.
different. I mean, what does it mean when you bring harm to the heart of another person?
Yeah.
What is it? And it transcends that conversation. What does it mean when you say something cruel to a woman in your church? I remember one of the big controversies when I was the pastor of the church that kicked me out because I was too radical for him. And one of the conversations that I had was a woman who was set to be ordained, and she was pregnant. And she got pregnant while in divinity school by another member of the clergy who was set to be ordained at the same time that she was set to be ordained. He's set to be ordained in a very prominent church where the pastor is one who I consider my mentor. And she is set to be ordained at the church where I led, and she has to carry the criticism of being able to show her being pregnant,
Right.
while he is able to go forward with his ordination.
Yeah.
And I had to make the decision on what to do,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I made a decision to go forward with her ordination
Yeah.
through the massive criticism of the congregation.
Wow.
And there was other thing I could not do. I could not tell them why.
Yeah.
I could not tell them why because it was not my story to tell.
Yeah.
I had to honor and protect her story
Yeah.
while also honoring and protecting my responsibility in the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
or the kingdom of God.
Right.
And I was in a place of stark criticism for the fact that as I prayed, I had to hear God say to me, why is it that he can be ordained and she can't when they both participated in the same act? And do we want to make this decision that was made to have this baby? Do we want to make that baby a sin?
Some good questions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
and I lift that in this moment because it's a deeply theological conversation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to charge my phone real quick.
Oh,
It's
no.
a theological conversation. All of that is about the way we think about what it means to be created by God and to be created in partnership, and that we could easily think about this moment being about, well, they're gonna come after you.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you put your theology at the forefront of decisions you make, then you're gonna come out with a different kind of conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Woo! Dr. Carl Kenney. There you have it.
So good. So much to chew on.
I know. This has been a really meaningful conversation, sir, and we're deeply grateful to know you.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited you're going to be here.
Oh my goodness.
May coming up quick.
Yeah, couple more months, sir. So yeah, we thank you again for your time with this episode, with this conversation, and we look forward to joining you very soon.
It's good to see you guys. Get here soon.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
We absolutely will.
All right. Peace.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Black South podcast, South to America. Before we go, here's an excerpt from Imani Perry's book. I am American. That means something to me. Some common ground with others of this soil, even as the country feels irredeemably racist and maybe not worth saving. It is what Du Bois calls a two-ness, two warring souls, black yet American. You face it in its most raw truth below the Mason-Dixon line. To be an American is to be infused with the plantation South, with its black vernacular, its insurgency, and also its brutal masculinity, its worship of whiteness, its expulsion and its massacres, its self-defeating stinginess and unapologetic pride. If this speaks to you, grab a copy of her book and visit blksouth.org for more meaningful reflections. You can follow us on social media at blksouth. To help others find this podcast, leave a review, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more stories from the South.